Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. My name is Ashley. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Relations here at the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, and I'm pleased to be with you today as your moderator. Please note that today's webinar will be recorded, and we will absolutely be circulating a link out to all attendees in the coming days. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen throughout the session. We also ask that participants engage respectfully and professionally. Harassment, discrimination, and offensive language will not be tolerated. We've also enabled closed captioning in French, which can be accessed along the bottom menu. And please note that attendees will be invited to complete a short anonymous survey that will appear at the end of today's session. I'd like to begin our time today by acknowledging our privilege as an organization that operates on the traditional and contemporary lands of many Indigenous peoples. Our team lives and works in communities from coast to coast to coast on both unceded territories and treaty land. And we acknowledge and honor Indigenous peoples as the original and ongoing caretakers of these lands. As a workplace largely made up of settlers, we recognize that our presence and our work take place within colonial systems that continue to cause harm. Our team is committed to ongoing learning, reflection, and concrete action to help dismantle those structures, both within our own practices and in the broader systems with which we seek to change. We also recognize that human trafficking disproportionately impacts Indigenous peoples due to the legacy of colonialism and systemic inequalities. We are committed to supporting Indigenous-led efforts to prevent and respond to trafficking and upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples to sovereignty and self-determination. So today's webinar is going to feature a presentation from Julia Drydyk, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, and it will explore the role of the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline in Canada's anti-trafficking response, discuss the hotline's guiding values, its foundational policies, and how we approach providing support to our callers. After that, we're going to move into a bit of a facilitated conversation that will feature both Julia and Junie Desil, who is the Centre's Senior Director of Strategy and Operations, to give you a behind-the-scenes picture of hotline operations. And then after that, we'll have some time for remaining audience questions. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Julia.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And just bear with me as I share my screen. Hang on. There we go. Can everyone see Ashley, can people see my screen okay? All right, let's get started. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to join with us today. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Julia. I'm the Executive Director here at the Centre. And our goal today is to provide an overview, but also this kind of behind the scenes look at what really happens in operating the hotline and what it's like. So folks don't know, the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking was founded in 2016 with the bold mandate of ending all forms of human trafficking in Canada. We're not just responding, we're trying to get to the root causes. And in Canada, we're largely seeing it be sex trafficking and labor trafficking. In 2019, in response to the exploitation already happening in Canada, we launched the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, 24/7, 365-day-a-year resource for victims and survivors, friends, family members, service providers, members of the general public, and law enforcement to access referrals, supports, and services. We're available 24/7, 365 days a year, and we are a bilingual hotline, meaning our hotline response advocates are able to answer calls and web chats and other signals in French and English. But we're also able to provide services in over 200 languages through simultaneous interpretation. So in addition to being able to call us anytime of any day at 1-833-900-1010, folks can also engage with us through web chat on our website at canadianhumantraffickinghotline.ca. But what is it that we actually do? So I'll say the number one service that we do provide is around referrals to supports and programs in communities. We've partnered with over 1,000 frontline service delivery partners from coast to coast to coast. And so one of the main service offerings we provide is being able to connect our callers with those services that they identify they need the most. We've also partnered with 99 specialized law enforcement units from across Canada. So if folks wish to report or engage with law enforcement, or even find out what their reporting options are, we can also be there to help. But we also recognize that our callers are often calling us in very unsafe or dangerous situations. So another thing that we often do is safety planning. And safety planning is a collaborative conversation where we work with our callers to identify steps they can take or things they can do to reduce or minimize the dangers that they're facing. Again, this is a very collaborative process, meeting our callers where they're at. And then we also provide emotional support by providing a non-judgmental and emotionally safe space for them to talk about the situation they're in and to have an open conversation about options and what their potential next steps might be. But we don't just serve survivors. We also work with members of the general public and also, again, friends, family members, people that want to find out more, want to access resources, or to help be part of prevention and building awareness. I'm going to take a minute to talk about some of our foundational policies, because before we get into the nuts and bolts, these are the policies that guide every single part of every conversation. And the first is to do no harm. Again, recognizing that there are real current risks, but there could also be additional risks if steps aren't taken that don't recognize the unique situation of our callers. So this is why individual consent is so incredibly important. And it's active and ongoing on every single call. We ask for consent from when we ask to take notes on the call for case coordination purposes. We ask for consent to make a referral. We ask for consent to share their information as part of referrals. And we also ask for consent around any potential follow-up. We don't take any actions without our callers being in the driver's seat and agreeing to it. And it's also incredibly important that we are confidential. Nothing that is said at the hotline ever gets shared with anyone without consent or unless there is a legal duty to report. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And then finally is non-discrimination. We actively take measures to not discriminate against any of our callers based on grounds of background, age, ability, country of origin, or immigration status, any human rights ground. So we really do aim to make it accessible and inclusive for anyone who needs our services. So what actually happens when you call? So the very first thing that is going to happen is triage. You're going to get a phone tree, and then you're going to have the option to pick English or French or a different language. And then you can also select urgent. And that is for if you're short on time and you need to have the conversation quickly. We also make it clear we are not an emergency service. In the event of an emergency, you should be calling 911. But then once you get through the phone tree and connect with one of our hotline response advocates, there's going to be a live person at the other end of the phone saying, Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, are you in a safe place to talk? And if the answer is no, we immediately work with them on safety planning and even discuss options in connecting them to 911 services in their community to address that immediate safety need. But if they are in a safe place, we conduct a needs assessment, which is a fancy way of saying, why are you calling us and what can we do to help? They talk about what types of services they're looking for, information, and from there, we talk about what their options are. Again, we've partnered with over 1,000 frontline service delivery partners. So by leveraging our national referral directory, we're able to work with them on what the potential options are in their community or elsewhere and talk to them about what those next steps might be. And so that might be a warm referral that minute. We might be able to then call the service provider and connect them in that call. Or if they're not ready, or if the service isn't open at that time, we might give them the phone number for them to connect later. Or they also have the option of other follow-up. And we will never call anyone without their consent. We will never reach out to anyone, but they do have the option of asking us to reach out to a few service delivery partners, see what's available, and then follow up with them. Again, every single step of the process is completely guided by the caller. I also want to take a minute to talk about trauma-informed care and what that looks like in the context of the hotline. So for us in operating the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, trauma-informed care means recognizing the impact that trauma has on an individual, but also the reality that many other services and institutions can actually re-traumatize individuals. So again, it's about putting that choice, control, and autonomy at the very center of every call. It's also about recognizing that there's a power dynamic that you can't avoid when someone's in need of services, and we're an access point to those services. And so that's why it's so important that we engage in collaborative decision making, that we're working with them, we're not telling them what to do, and we're really, again, working on collaboration as creating space for that control and autonomy of their own decision making. We also know that navigating social services can be really hard and complicated. And so we are very intentional about managing expectations, telling folks what we can and what we can't do, what's within our power and what isn't, ensuring that there's real informed consent, that they know as much as possible, what it is that a various service offering might provide, and being really clear again about who is doing what and how. But we also provide a space that's non-judgmental, that's validating, that's affirming, and that at its core believes survivors, and that stands with them and is a portal to resources to help them along their journey. I do want to say, though, there's a couple limitations on all of these foundational policies, and that is where we are legally obligated to report it to law enforcement or other authorities. So this is a situation where there is imminent harm or danger to our caller or someone else, but also where the potential victim is a child, or also where the potential offender is a child. We're also very clear about this in our consent, and as much as possible, we try and let people know what our legal duty to report is. And then I want to talk a minute about our national referral directory, because again, we've partnered with 1,000 frontline service delivery partners, again, providing 4,000 unique programs and services. And this includes things like emergency shelter, transitional shelter, healthcare services, legal services. We've really tried to map out services that exist along the spectrum of service needs for our callers. And where possible, we try and connect people where appropriate with specialized services. We know our callers have really unique needs and sometimes require multiple referrals to different services. So as much as possible, we try and to provide that connection to those specialized services. And then also, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, we are able to facilitate a connection to law enforcement units if the caller wants happen, enough information to action that type of a referral. I do want to say we live and operate in a very imperfect system where there are glaring gaps that our hotline response advocates have to navigate every single day. And one of them is there's in some areas just a lack of services for certain communities. There are almost no programs for male survivors specifically of sex trafficking. There's not many programs for trafficking survivors that are part of the 2S LGBTQI community, as well as for folks with disabilities and migrant workers. These are real gaps. But we're also finding that there's a lack of specialized supports. So about 20% of partners in our national referral directory are human trafficking specific. That means that 80% kind of generalized services, and sometimes that's all that's available. So it can be really hard to meet the needs of our callers in those situations. We also see systemically that there just aren't enough legal services for survivors of labor trafficking. There's a real lack of affordable, long-term specialized counseling for survivors, especially if they're a couple years out of their trafficking situation. It's a real problem across Canada. And we're also not seeing enough addiction services that focus or incorporate intersectionality. We also see that there's structural and geographic barriers. So we know that survivors are being moved systematically across the country to different provinces as part of their exploitation. And so if someone has exited their trafficking situation and they're hoping to go back to their home community, while there are some services available, there aren't enough to do that interprovincial transportation. And we're also seeing real gaps in transportation from rural communities to urban communities, as well as settlement services. I want to talk a little bit and provide some clarity on what reporting to the police might look like and what it doesn't look like. So when someone contacts the hotline and they say, I'm a survivor, I've been exploited, I want to connect with law enforcement, we discuss what their options are. Again, we've got reporting protocols with 99 law enforcement units. So they can either contact them directly or be transferred to them directly, or we can also provide a tip on their behalf with their consent, especially if they choose to remain anonymous. We can also connect callers to emergency services anywhere in the country through our partnership with Northern 911. But again, unless there is a legal duty to report, callers and specifically survivors are in the driver's seat as much as possible. I will say it's very challenging for us to do actioning on third-party tips. We're finding it's more effective, and it's we just have the information we need when we have connected with the survivor and where we have their consent. But there's certain things that we don't do as a matter of policy and practice. And one is we never push for law enforcement involvement, especially if someone says they don't want to. So if someone's calling us for emergency shelter or counseling or healthcare services, we don't try and convince them to contact law enforcement. We really, work with them based on how they identify their needs. And we also don't report non-trafficking crimes to law enforcement. We're really specific in what types of reporting protocols we have. So if someone calls us trying to report other crimes, we often refer them elsewhere, including agencies like Crime Stoppers. And another thing that people often assume is that we actually are able to investigate or validate the information, and we cannot. We transmit information under very specific circumstances, but we are not on the ground investigating or corroborating any of the claims. I also want to take a minute to talk about hotline data and its use. Because when the hotline first launched, it was kind of imagined as this like really robust, large data collection tool, and one that would be able to kind of speak to the prevalence of human trafficking in Canada. And in all honesty, it's not. It's not statistically significant. It doesn't represent the totality of human trafficking in Canada. It represents folks that are calling our hotline and what we are doing. So the main reason that we collect information and data is for case coordination and also to provide trauma-informed services. We know how re-traumatizing it is for someone to have to tell their story over and over again just to access services. And so with the consent of the caller, we take notes on each call so they can call back 2, 3, 20 times and pick up where the last call left off, even if it's a completely different hotline response advocate. We also use it for internal monitoring and evaluation, for quality assurance, to make sure that we're meeting our performance standards. But it's also a way for us to identify, are we meeting the needs of our callers? Are there trends or new service needs that we need to think about to better meet their needs? We do share some aggregated high-level data, but again, with lots of caveats and protections to make sure people know that this does not represent the totality of human trafficking in Canada. And finally, I'm going to share that we do have lots of great awareness resources available on our website. If you're a QR person, you can check out that QR code and get linked directly to them. They are in many, many languages with lots of options, and they're available to download for free on our website, or in most situations, if you reach out to us, either through the hotline or through partnerships, we're able to print and mail materials directly to you. So that is it for my presentation. I'm looking forward to jumping into a bigger conversation now, so I'll hand it back to Ashley.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. I think that really helped provide a foundational context for the next portion of our conversation today and really outlined, the hotline scope and our values and our approach to providing care. So the next part of today's session, we're going to have a bit of a facilitated dialogue with Julia and Junie. So Junie, I would invite you to come on camera and unmute yourself, please. There she is, looking fabulous in red. So Junie, we're going to start with you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So you joined the center in March as our Senior Director of Strategy and Operations, and you bring over 20 years of experience and leadership in the not-for-profit sector, having worked with communities who are most impacted by systemic inequalities. Can you let us know how your intersectional approach to social justice work in frontline roles, such as with the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, have transitioned into your oversight of the daily operations of the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline?
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. So as you mentioned, I joined the center in March, so just a little under 6 months. And I oversee many of the organization's operational systems and strategic functions. But my grounding is firmly rooted in community. So yes, I worked extensively at the Downtown Eastside Women's Center in Vancouver. I've worked with unhoused women, with youth impacted by violence, you name it. And from that, what I've learned and what stayed with me is working from an intersectional and trauma-informed lens. So whether it is that you're working frontline or leading national strategy, the principles for me remain the same. People need to feel safe, heard, and valued. And at the center, even though I've only been here 5 months, I do try to ensure that this ethos carries through our, internal practices, from how we build out and roll out systems, how we support our teams, how we develop policies, think about scaling impact. All of these are informed by that approach and my experience. And we may not always get it right, but I think the important part is being able to listen deeply to the feedback that we get, and steward the work in ways that make equity possible, that enables frontline advocacy and systems change work to happen with integrity and care. So.
Great, thank you. And I think your comments around the importance of people feeling seen and heard is like well taken. If we can kind of shift that theme a little bit and think about how this translates to culture and daily operations for the staff, can you talk a little bit about what it's like, the culture is like on the hotline, and maybe what it's like to answer those calls?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to say that we have an incredible staff team and collective on the hotline who demonstrate deep care, inclusion, and deep respect, not just for the callers, but for each other. And I think that's important, to help sustain a trauma-informed workplace where staff feel supported so that they can support callers and signalers that are coming to us. Answering calls can be incredibly intense. Staff are holding intense stories, people who are reaching out maybe in crisis or trying to support someone who is. We hear from potential victims or survivors, and what our staff do is to really take the time to understand the situation that the caller is in, and ensure safety, and collaboratively support the caller in making the next steps and decisions. So, we hear from a variety of people. No two calls are the same. And, because of the nature of the work, vicarious trauma is real. And so we try to model a workplace where we're flexible, we support staff. Staff can have debriefs to sort of, ground themselves after calls, and to be grounded when they're providing support. So I can't speak enough about the incredible work the staff are doing and how they really do a lot of work to support potential victims and callers and anyone who's looking for information and support.
Yeah, thanks, Junie. It sounds like peer support and debriefing and mentorship is really key to the successful, healthy hotline staff.
Absolutely.
Great. So could you tell us a little bit about what sort of skills or background or experience lend well to working on the hotline?
Yeah. And I'd say, there is no single background that defines who can thrive on the hotline, but there are some key and core qualities that help. Having emotional intelligence, being able to listen without judgment, hold space for someone in distress, and be calm and grounded under pressure. Um, ex- uh, we need staff who are both compassionate, who are clear thinkers, who are heart-led, and we look for people who are team players and problem solvers, folks who are collaborative, curious, and who understand that every call is different and might require a unique solution. And our hotline staff come from a wide range of backgrounds. Some have worked on frontline, like shelters, harm reduction programs. Others have experience in child protection. So there's a wide range of experience that is relevant and that can work here. And so, what ultimately matters is a willingness to support folks who call in a kind and non judgmental way.
Perfect. Thanks, Junie. So now I'm going to transition over to Julia. We've talked about all of the wonderful things and the wonderful people who support the hotline operations. Julia, I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges from your perspective in operating a 24/7 hotline.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges really unique to a hotline is that we're just that, and we're also confidential. So it's really rare that we ever know what actually happens once that call is over. And so unlike other forms of direct service, we don't get to hear success stories all the time. You don't always get that closure that like kind of helps in dealing with some of the vicarious trauma that you're taking every day. So that's a real challenge. And it's also the fact that, again, it's a hotline. You don't get to see someone, you don't see their body language. It's hard to, you're working entirely off of voice to be able to provide that sense of calm or assurance. So that's a whole skill in and of itself. And I'd say that's even worse with chat. So when we're chatting and like you don't even get a sense of someone's tone, it's hard to know how to provide that really trauma-informed, supportive support. But then I'll also say, and I mentioned this before, we live in an imperfect system. And I think it's really challenging when you've got someone on the phone and they're in need of emergency shelter or counseling, and we're doing 12, 15 call outs, and there's no services available. And I think it's both it's challenging in the moment, but I think for me, it's very angering. Like that's what fuels my passion for systems change and advocacy. Because I don't think that we should be in a country or a space where services aren't available to our callers when they need them and how they need them.
Yeah, that definitely sounds challenging. Junie, how do you envision success on the hotline? I know, there's some real practical challenges being national and doing this work essentially remotely. But how do you measure success on the hotline? What does that look like for the team?
Yeah, a good question. So, I think sometimes we like to think that success is fixing everything, making things 100% perfect for the potential for the caller, but it's really about showing up with care, respect in a moment that's challenging for the caller. It's about being able to meet the caller's need with the right referral, whether that's an emergency shelter, legal aid, or healthcare, or even just emotional support. And so, really, it's sometimes just about walking through the process, being calm, non-judgmental, listening actively, even if the potential victim is not ready to leave a situation. And so, even if someone is trying to exit a trafficking situation, success can just simply mean helping them create a safety plan, that reduces risk, protects their agency, choice, and ability to make their own decisions, and supports the next step, whatever that might be. So it's not a one size fits all in terms of success, but the goal of hotline staff is to support people on their terms, with dignity and without pressure. So it's really about that connection, practical support, and honoring the complexity of each person's story.
I think it's important to put aside our preconceived ideas of what success is and really support that caller in that collaborative decision-making process. And really coming from a strengths-based perspective is really important. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the persistent myths and misperceptions that still exist about the hotline, and ask you, Junie, if there are any sort of nagging myths that you wish that you could take a moment to debunk with us today.
Yeah, and I think Julia touched on a couple of them, but one of them is that that we're part of government or law enforcement, and we're not. We're an independent, confidential service. We don't share information without a caller's consent, unless there's immediate safety risk, and then we have clear legal boundaries around how that looks like. And so where there's a duty to report, we let the caller know that this is what's going to happen. Another one is that we're some kind of investigative body, that we're secretly mapping trafficking networks and poised to take direct action. That's not our role. We're not investigators. We're here again to support individuals, provide trauma-informed referrals, and document non-identifying data to make appropriate referrals to understand trends, not to crack cases or dismantle trafficking rings. And finally, people often think we have special access to services that others don't. But really, the reality is we work with the same resources and service networks that are available to the public. We're just here to facilitate connections, to help folks navigate those systems and match folks to the right options for this situation. So that's, I hope that clears that up for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying those points. And I think this is a good transition talking about services. In your presentation, Julia, you talked about service referrals and how the center has those really robust relationships across Canada. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the directory was developed and what the process for inclusion looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say I was at the center when all of this was coming together, but not as executive director. So I saw it across the hall. We had an amazing team of 4 full-time partnership specialists whose entire jobs it was to populate the National Referral Directory. So we actually picked up the phone. It was a lot of phone calls. Actually, I'll step back. We did a comprehensive environmental scan. So we knew by doing research what some general trends were in terms of what the types of services that we thought would be requested by survivors, especially before we launched. So things like, again, housing, shelter, healthcare, legal supports, financial supports, basic needs, immigration and settlement, language services, the list goes on. So they did an environmental scan then to see what services were available. And then they picked up the phone and made the phone calls. They figured out who was delivering the programs, what the programs look like, but then also having a minimum inclusion criteria. And I think we've got a question about this from the audience. We do have minimum inclusion criteria. So they do need to be registered organizations. They do need to have certain important policies in place and in good standing. I might be missing some, Ashley. Anything else you can think of?
No, I would just add our minimum inclusion criteria is publicly available on the center's website. And I do want to acknowledge that the center is not the judge and jury in terms of what the gold standard of trauma-informed care is. So we're certainly open to a conversation. This is also an invitation to any providers who are on the call with us today. If you're not part of the referral directory and you want to have that conversation, please reach out. We're always looking to add service providers, fill those strategic kind of gaps that we've identified. that's work that is ongoing.
But with that, again, lots and lots and lots of work. So I would say those 4 full-time staff worked constantly for at least 6 months just to get to half of where we are right now in the National Referral Directory so that we could turn the phones on. So it was a lot of work. Right now, we're largely in a maintenance system. So I said about 20% of all of those programs are human trafficking specific. We're getting to a point where I think a large proportion of those programs are in our directory, but there's still just not enough in the universe, or in Canada, sorry, specifically. But also what we're also finding is sometimes the new trends in terms of service needs are changing. And so again, that's how we leverage data internally to say, what additional outreach do we need to do to make sure that we have partnerships in place to serve folks who are calling us. And that also means looking at who isn't in the directory that we could add in or forming partnerships.
Thanks, Julia. And I think now, thinking about that national scope that the center has, the national mandate really helps, really provides our team with a bird's eye view of the anti-trafficking landscape and those gaps that you had identified. In your opinion, as the executive director of the center, what needs to change to achieve better? I know this is a big question. This is a meaty one, but what needs to change in terms of achieving better outcomes for survivors? And what are the sort of tangible policy solutions that the center is currently advocating for?
So there's a couple sides to this. One is and this could be its own webinar, so just cut me off if I go too long, because this is where I get really
excited.
Passionate.
Yeah.
There's two things. There's responding to the crisis in front of us right now, and then there's our actual mandate of ending it so it never happens again. And that is our ultimate goal as an organization, is to put ourselves out of business and to end all forms of human trafficking in Canada. On both sides of that, there's a couple things. So in both response and prevention, we are calling on every single province to develop an anti-trafficking strategy in perpetuity that is both whole of government, so looking at prevention, response, policy, but also, and this is where we need to do some work, adequately funded. This cannot be done on shoestrings. Already the general services sector are struggling to meet up with the demand for services. And we really need sustained evidence-based funding that's in place in perpetuity until we succeed at achieving our mandate. Then there's also a lot of structural issues. So labor trafficking specifically is largely happening because of how flawed and exploitative our temporary foreign worker system is. Right now, it is the law that temporary foreign workers are essentially owned by their employer. They're only allowed to stay in Canada as long as they stay with that employer. They have legally fewer rights than any other workers, despite the fact that many of our most vital economic systems are completely reliant on their labor. So we need to be looking at significant legal reforms there, and also in providing them with the basic rights of all other people basically living in Canada, as well as access to services. We also see major issues with how international student policies and systems are being set up that kind of set folks up for being targeted for exploitation. Again, like creating systems of discrimination and inequity that traffickers are intentionally honing in on and taking advantage of. And then there's also other systemic issues like the housing crisis that we are all in right now. And when things like basic needs and shelter and housing are, when you're one paycheck away from losing your house, even as a middle class person, but when you think about the rising income inequality and equity issues that pertain to housing, this isn't just about getting more emergency shelters so that we can connect callers on the hotline. This is about ensuring that everyone in Canada have access to opportunity to sustainably meet their needs, and that we're not creating economic and social systems that are pitting us against each other as a society.
Thanks, Julia.
There's a lot more. There's more that could also be discussed. And
for sure. Where can folks find the center's like public policy positions?
So there's on our center website, under resources, you can go to policy recommendations. I'll say the hotline website is designed specifically for potential callers to the hotline. And so we really talk about what the hotline is and information that would benefit someone who would want to access our services. The center site is really more focused on broader education and awareness, research, policy development, and it speaks more to our vision of ending human trafficking, whereas the hotline is one tool that we're leveraging to respond to what's already happening on the ground.
Great, and that's www.canadiancentertoendhumantrafficking.ca.
Yes, that is it.
Great, thank you for that. So I think now we can transition into addressing some of the audience questions, if that works for both of you. Great, so I'm going to just go in order in which these were received. So we talked about the challenges and the systemic barriers and the gaps in services, and we have a question here. Someone's asking, when acknowledging how many systemic and service barriers exist, what are some ways call takers might navigate this with your callers? And what are some creative solutions that you're using to address those barriers?
I'll take a first stab at this, and then I'm sure Junie is going to be able to fill it in. So another myth and misperception that people have is that we've got like relationships where there's like secret beds or resources available that we can tap into, and that's not true. We exist within the same social service system as everyone else. But it's through those partnerships that we're able often to kind of pick up the phone and see what's available. So instead of just giving someone a whole bunch of phone numbers and saying, good luck, I hope one of them has availability to support you. In many situations, we're able to kind of, with their consent again, and where appropriate, to kind of pick up the phone and say, is there a wait list? Is there room in this program to support someone? And then it's also because of our ongoing case coordination, because we keep track of the referrals that we've made for the person. So they can call back and they can say, that referral did not work out for me. What else have you got? And at least that way, we're not just presenting the same organization over and over again. Like it kind of, again, the intent is to put the caller at the center, and so that they don't have to repeat the same steps, repeat the same story.
Try to streamline things.
As much as possible. Anything you'd add, Junie?
No, I think you covered most of it, and I certainly want to also mention that those barriers that exist, I think, increase when call takers are calling overnight or at night. So certainly, I know that creative solution finding amps up probably after midnight or certainly after service providers call. So I do appreciate the work that hotline staff do in navigating these structural barriers.
Thank you. So we also have a question here. Someone asked, do you prioritize or have survivors working on the hotline? And what are your thoughts and processes for survivor leadership or survivor advocacy? And inclusion, I'm assuming inclusion.
And I'll kick it off again and then hand it over to Junie. Ethical survivor inclusion is really important to every single part about how the center operates. And so we actively do encourage people with lived experience to apply to the hotline and to other roles at the center as well. But having said that, we are also an organization with limited resources, and so we don't have indefinite positions available all of the time. We also take an approach where we try and walk the walk on trauma-informed support in everything we do, and knowing that not everyone or every survivor might actually disclose as a survivor. So we try to build policies, processes, and a workplace culture that is trauma-informed, inclusive, and really supportive, so that folks can access supports and services, and also get support in addressing some of the vicarious trauma or re-traumatization. because we do know that there are often folks with lived experience that don't like to publicly disclose. So we'd rather ensure that we're putting those protocols and supports in across the board so that we never miss anything. That is our goal. No one ever gets it right 100%. It's our aim. But what do you think? Anything you want to add, Junie?
Nothing to add, but I was just going to follow on the thread that, yeah, humbly speaking, that this is ongoing work. Inclusion that is ethical, that is that prioritizes and centers survivors is big work, ongoing work, and we will keep continuing to do that until we get it right. So I would say keep staying tuned. It's work that we're prioritizing and trying to do well.
And I think there's also part of the question I didn't answer, is that was hotline related. The other one is generally around lived experience leadership and survivor leadership, which is something that there's more work that needs to be done, but the center wholeheartedly believes in and supports. I will be honest in saying that there are real issues in the anti-trafficking sector in providing opportunities for meaningful, ethical, and well-compensated survivor leadership. I think that's a trend that I've really noticed in coming into this space over the last 6 years. And so I think we also need to think structurally about how it is that we work as a network, as a movement, and addressing areas where survivors and people with lived experience have experienced exploitation within the sector, right? So how do we also establish standards and practices and bring people in terms of how can we up our game as a sector overall to prioritize, nurture, and support survivor leadership across all elements of the movement, but based on their own choice. I also want to say, not everyone who's experienced trafficking want to be a leader in this space. That's not our expectation, but we think that structurally the sector should intentionally be nurturing that leadership and prioritizing it if people do want to lead.
Thanks for that. I think really sticking with me is like the intentionality, but that it's a practice, right? It's a muscle. You have to continue to flex that muscle and grow your practice. So thank you for that. We also have a question here, just more related to direct service provision. So the attendee asks if there's no place for a caller to go if they're looking to exit a trafficking situation, so no shelters available. What do you do? What would you recommend in a situation like that to a caller?
I think that's, and Junie can chime in too, that's where we would explore follow-up options. And again, with consent, we'd also probably explore safety planning in that moment. So really focusing on those immediate needs. But if based on their needs, their situation, what they want, if nothing is available, again, we're open and transparent. Like often there's teamwork going. So one hotline response advocate will be on the phone with the caller, and someone else will be doing the call outs to all the agencies to see what's available. So it's not like we're putting someone on hold. We've got someone actively working with the caller. But in a world where there is nothing available, and that has happened. It has absolutely happened where people have had to stay in their trafficking situation because there was nowhere to go in that moment. And so then, yeah, we focus on safety planning and potential follow-up as well. So we'll say we might be able to identify services in a different region. That's when we might look at trying to identify transportation options, which again are challenging, but thinking about that more medium-term support.
Yeah, it sounds difficult, a difficult situation to navigate, and unfortunately not uncommon given the patchwork of services available. Thanks, Julia.
We have a question. Junie?
Oh. No, you got this. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So we have a question here just about safety. So how does the hotline keep staff safe from potential traffickers calling in and targeting the safety of staff or callers?
All of our staff are anonymous. They use pseudonyms on the hotline. We are in an entirely virtual environment right now, but back when we worked in an office, our office location was private even to our biggest funders. So we kept the location completely secured. And so through keeping our staff identities anonymous, and then we often also will have conversations about our own active safety planning. I think, yeah, it is a concern, but one where through anonymizing their identification and taking other security protocols, we also have a really robust internal IT and technology security features. So it's both around phishing and vishing and all of that stuff. But it's also if someone's trying to find out information or engage in any other scams or information finding. So we regularly train and test all of our team members to make sure that we're basically, what is it, a human firewall as well as having digital firewalls. Our IT people would be very proud of me right now, I think.
I can hear them cheering in the background.
Yeah. Junie,
Great,
any thoughts for how
No,
like?
No, that covers it. And of course, like if there's anything out of the usual, things are escalated appropriately for decisions in the moment to be made. So, so far, touch wood, we're doing okay with that. And I think the hotline leadership is particularly sensitive to that and is very careful and really supportive of staff safety and well-being.
Thank you, Junie. There's a question in the chat that was answered, but I thought maybe we could just expand on it a little bit. So there's someone here that is a school resource officer based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and they're looking to do a human trafficking presentation to high school students and potentially parents. So would either one of you be able to speak to some of the education and awareness offerings, presentations, other things that the center does that folks might not be aware of?
Absolutely. This is Ashley's team in all honesty too, so feel free to chime in as well. So a big part of what we do is education and awareness. And I'll say one of the only benefits of the COVID pandemic was the fact that we were able to transition entirely to remote work, which means we've been able to hire team members across the country. Now, even with that, we're not always able to do all trainings in person. So we often do a lot of virtual trainings, but depending on where people are located, we might be able to see if there's an opportunity for us to do trainings. But we're also able to connect you with resources in your community that are able to do the trainings in person or to meet your needs. So we don't have to do everything ourselves. We can also be that place to go to find out what education awareness services are available and to kind of support you in getting that set up.
Great, thank you.
And that's also something you can contact the hotline on. And so then what they will do is take that information and give it to someone in our partnerships team who can then follow up. But again, obviously with consent for follow-up.
Great, thank you. All right, I have a question here around, so just to say there have been some really lovely comments in the Q&A applauding you for comments on survivor inclusion and really appreciative of the Q&A and the session today. Someone is asking, does the center refer trans female into women's shelters? And in a larger context of the gaps and overcapacity of the shelter system in general?
First, I need to say we support trans communities, and I think that just needs to be said. But I also will recognize that there are certain women's shelters that don't see the world the way that we do. And so as much as possible, we try and find out where there are active policies in place that are exclusionary to trans identifying folks. It's hard though too, because we don't always see behind what the general policies are, right? Like that form of discrimination and oppression sometimes exists in policy and sometimes it exists outside of policy. So again, we function within an imperfect system, but within our own database of services, those are the types of questions that we ask in terms of inclusion, exclusion criteria, because it would be very upsetting to me if we referred someone to a shelter where they are excluded because of their gender identity. And that's not how we operate, but that is the world that we live in.
Definitely an imperfect
Yeah.
system. Anything you wanted to touch on, Junie?
No, just to say again, like our hotline staff are incredibly skilled and ensure that they have relevant information to pass on to callers that would make referrals or decisions around the referral make sense for the caller. So, you know, I think with all the information they have about the referral, they can help potential victims, callers, et cetera, make informed decisions.
Thank you. So I have just a comment here from someone who is in a rural area north of Edmonton and just said, thanking us for the It's Time to Talk resource. Was able to share that with a community of fierce women and appreciates the work of the center and is feeling inspired. So just wanted to end on that positive note. So that brings us to almost our 1 hour mark. For folks, if you have any sort of burning, outstanding questions, you want to connect with us on resources or joining the referral directory, please email us at partnership@ccteht.ca. We'd love to connect with you offline. On behalf of the entire team at the center, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And really especially want to thank Junie and Julia for your transparency and your candor with us today. I hope the session gave viewers a better sense of who we are, our approach to support on the hotline, and the values that we as an organization strive to uphold. Thank you so much.